Tananarive was one of the guests of honor at the WisCon42 convention, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the essay written by Lisa Bolekaya about Tananarive. She loves to inspire new writers, and her work teaching for the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop, and also teaching for VONA, Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, has ushered in and supported new writers of speculative fiction. She has taught at Spelman, Antioch University, and offered a course on Afrofuturism for many years at UCLA. She's a wonderful cheerleader and advocate for up-and-coming writers. Professionally, Tananarive started off her writing career as a journalist working for the Miami Herald, but I'm glad that she quit so that she could focus on writing stories about ghosts, children facing down zombies, powerful black girls who can control the elements, people haunted by dead music legends, werewolves who get cosmetic surgery to disguise their monthly issues, and so on and so on and so on. The gift of her writing is that she has an innate sense of history and how it plays out in the Black imagination. It is interwoven in the fabric of her narratives. It's what makes her work both strange and familiar to me. She comes from a people who have survived enslavement and continue to survive the horrors of racism and racial bias. And by writing in the horror genre in particular, she's doing some nuanced cultural work. By centering Black characters and peeling back layers of real-life horror mixed with speculative what-if moments, her stories are richer, scarier, and more thought-provoking. Lisa Bolekaya.
Wow, there are a lot of you in here. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. This is my first WisCon. I've heard so many good things, and all of those good things are true and more. Wow, this is wow. Okay. Before I begin, I also wanted to acknowledge the passing of Gardner Dozois, who published I was writing novels first, but my first short story was Patient Zero, which appeared in fantasy and science fiction, and he included it in a Best of the Year anthology for science fiction, which was shocking to me as a horror writer. I didn't know I was a science fiction writer, so he'll always have a special place in my heart for that, and I'm so sorry to hear about his passing. Thank you, Lisa, for that beautiful essay you wrote about me in the program guide and talking about my mom. And it is so great to be here with my entire Twitter timeline. That's so exciting. And also my fellow warriors, and also so many writers that I know. It's great to see Nisi Shaw and her mom, Mama June. To attend many book events with me, and I miss her terribly, but I do take pleasure in sort of absorbing other people's mothers' energy. So that has been wonderful, and what a great speech. I was like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to follow. Oh wait, I do have to follow that speech. Wow. So I kind of waited until the last minute, as is my way, to prepare my remarks. Ostensibly so I could incorporate some of my experiences here at WisCon, and something very special happened today that I just heard stories about. I was not actually present. But today there was a panel on Black Panther. And one of those moments happened that can only occur when enough like-minded people gather together to share their hearts. And on the topic of Black Panther's Killmonger, I'm assuming some of you have seen Black Panther, right? He's orphaned and left to fend for himself by King T'Chaka after T'Chaka slayed his brother and returned to the relative utopia of Wakanda. The film's sole African American, fueled by a thirst for revenge in the form of Black liberation in his mind, and T'Challa's greatest foe in the film. And he came up as he's one of the greatest Marvel villains. I think a lot of you will agree. And he came up today in conversation, and sort of wistfully, I understand, people were saying they wish that there was a world where Killmonger would have wanted to live. You might remember that famous line he spoke, "Bury me with my ancestors who jumped from the ships because they knew that death was better than bondage." And a young person who's sitting right here, Jennifer Cross, brought tears to the room when she said, "I can't imagine a world where Killmonger would want to live." And as award-winning writer Jen Brissett, who was sitting right here, said afterward, while we may not like the business part of the artist's life, and I'm sure a lot of us have discussed how much we hate the business part of the writer's life, it's bigger than us, she said, because we need to help young readers imagine a better world. And I could not agree more. Of what's called that Afrofuturism, of which the premier example on film is now Black Panther, which Ryan Coogler and Marvel blessed us with this year. And boy, did we need, deserve, and crave this blessing just to counteract the day-to-day onslaught of horror every time we read the news. These questions of imagining a better future are all the more important in our current political climate, when our White House is in the hands of a child who scoffs at tradition. We must raise ourselves as an army of artists to show a better way, or at least to help our readers have precious few moments of peace and escape before they head back into the fray. I was raised in Miami, as it has been mentioned, and my father, who's 83, calls himself a freedom lawyer, has worked tirelessly for civil rights since the 1960s. My late mother, Patricia Stevens-Dew, was mentioned, along with her sister, my Aunt Priscilla Causa, and other Florida A&M University students spent 49 days in jail in 1960 for sitting in at a Woolworth lunch counter, becoming a part of the nation's first jail. And that was my mom and her aunt. And my mom and I did author that memoir, Freedom in the Family. But Mom never set out to write a memoir, to be honest. And I certainly didn't, since I was raised after the end of Jim Crow, and I didn't even know where my story would fit in a civil rights narrative at the time. What she really wanted to do was write a book of all histories, the stories of sort of everyday activists who had been overlooked by history, who could explain why they stood up, why they got involved. And some of you are those activists, by the way, in the room today, or your parents were. And as you will know, if you come from an activist background, some of you have never told your family what you did. Some of you, or your parents, have not said too much. Sometimes they were under post-traumatic stress after their activism, and it was too painful to even talk about it. But the story of the civil rights era is the story of futurists. They believed they could work to create something better than what they had, even if it was beyond what they could imagine. For whatever his shortcomings may have been, I feel so blessed that my mother lived to see the election and inauguration and presidency of Barack Obama, and that we went to celebrate that inauguration as a family. And in the spring of 2017, I was invited to a great Florida program called Black Women Rise in West Palm Beach, Florida. Dr. Angela Davis was there as one of the speakers. Now, Dr. Davis is fierce in her work and gentle in her demeanor. And I asked her how she carries so much light. How many of you have ever met her or seen? Yes, several of you have met her. Well, you know what I'm talking about. She's just the most beautiful, gracious woman. And how does she carry so much light with her in the face of all the hardship, being in prison, charged with murder, blackness, and help ensure us a place in the future or remake our past? Writers like Octavia Butler, performers like Beyonce, Janelle Monáe, all the panels we've been having here. I also agree with my father, who says, Afrofuturism is what you do. because all of us, every one of us, is weaving a bit of the future today. We had an activism panel earlier today where I made a reference to a blog post that I started shortly after the election, but I was so traumatized that I couldn't post it until Inauguration Day. And it was called Surviving President, Lessons from the 1960s and Octavia E. Butler. And I talked about Parable of the Sower quite a bit, a lot of the Earthseed parables. I talked about my mother's activism. And I'm not going to read that blog post to you today, but there were certain elements of what I was really talking to myself, as is often the case with us as writers. We're writing for ourselves, and it just so happens that it's also helpful for others, right? You hope anyway. The first thing was breathe. In fact, let's all do that. Let's take in a deep breath and let it out. My husband, Stephen Barnes, advocates doing that consciously 5 times a day, where you sit and you just breathe, meditate, journal, dance, get rest. If you're an artist, create, because we're in this for the long haul. Freedom is a long journey, and none of us get there in the strictest sense. There's no there. There's a destination, right? There's a destination. And that journey toward that destination, but so often we don't reach it. And I'm actually going to quote Jennifer Brissett, because she's on my blog post too, and she's sitting right at my table. She said, I think this is a time to let the sadness in. And frankly, this not only applies to Election Day, but every day at this point. To let the sadness in, to just feel this and not fight the despair, soak your feet, wash your hair, take a nap, and eat the cheesecake. That's we're on our way. Sometimes just be okay with feeling lousy. Then put all of your hurt and sorrow into making something beautiful. And that's it. And the other piece, which I think is really epitomized in this room here, is the piece of building allies. And how do we address allyship and building allyship and all those squabbles that we all face, even when we're well-meaning, even when we're open-hearted. When Saladigo's talking about his moments where he feels he's failed as a feminist in his work, I'm thinking about where have I failed? With LGBT characters in my work, there are things I cringe when I look back on early work and things, because we're all growing, right? We're all changing. Our language is literally changing. Our perceptions are changing. Our experiences are changing. And one of Octavia's parables in Parable of the Sower is kindness eases change. So I think part of our responsibility is those of us who are trying to build allyship is to understand that we will make mistakes and to confront each other, but with kindness. And teach, and those we can't teach, oh my God, leave those behind. Leave those behind. We really it's called block on Twitter. That it's so important that we understand that these battles are not battles that we can win alone, and we cannot win them in a vacuum. And the narrative matters, which is so lucky that so many of us here are writers. But even those of you who don't consider yourselves writers, if you just think you're readers and appreciators, you are writing the narrative with every Facebook post, with every tweet, just to sort of steer maybe one more person toward the truth as we fight through the dual, maybe triple realities that the country is living through. Actually, more than triple realities. There are so many realities, but it's so stark now that there are people who live in our world of reality and those who live in another world. So we are weaving the counter narrative. And also, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my father, John Dew, who came of age during the 60s. He once represented Dr. King in St. Augustine, Florida, when he was arrested there with several others. He helped pioneer techniques to move civil rights cases from state courts where they were literally, my mother was tried in a state court for sitting at a lunch counter. And the N-word was used in the courtroom by the lawyers, in the courtroom, okay? So those are the courts that were supposedly dispensing justice. And my father helped pioneer tactics to move those cases from state court to federal court, where back in the 60s that might have been a better court. I don't know now. Come to think of it. So we may need to come up with some different tactics. But he's seen nearly a century of change. And like Octavia Butler often said, he agrees that based on science alone, humankind's future looks kind of grim, really. And likewise, the future looked grim when he was a young man in law school in the 1960s. But he stood up, and I want to quote my dad from my blog. He said, "Based upon the evidence, we are doomed." That's it. No. There's more. A 5-year-old can kill the whole human race almost if he has access to a button. I cannot categorize change in scientific terminology because based upon science, there is no hope. There is no future. This is him talking, but because we have a human capacity to feel and to believe otherwise and to believe and hope, that's what keeps us alive. And that is what I truly feel and believe, and I've been so blessed to have them as parents, because as you might imagine, being raised by civil rights activists, both of my sisters went to law school. I was the only one who didn't go to law school. I wanted to be a writer, you know. And I was so blessed that not only did they accept that I wanted to be a writer, but they nurtured me as a writer. My mother bought me this Thick Writers Market book every year for my birthday, which is where I first started submitting, short stories to magazines. When I wrote a book called Baby Bobby with typing paper and drew stick figures and folded the pages in half, she ran it off and gave it out to all the members of our church. And she told me the story about how in the 1960s, the Beverly Hills Hollywood branch of the NAACP was very well supported by the national office, because even then they understood the power of representation. And even though people were literally being lynched, driven off the road, registering voters and disappearing, as in the case of Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney in Mississippi, and those whose names we don't know, many whose names we don't know. Representation was important enough that the NAACP understood that, and my parents understood that. And since my mother was the first horror fan in my life, I didn't even get any, blowback about wanting to write horror. So she was the one who affected me with horror, as a matter of fact. And as I've gotten older, I have come to understand how much she used horror as a way to process trauma. It wasn't like a fun, wee roller coaster ride, which it was for me as a kid, like being scared in a safe way. Ew, it's fun, well, it's scared. No, but when you've had a tear gas canister thrown in your face, as she did when she was 20 years old, and wore dark glasses for the entire rest of her life after that because of irritation. When you're sitting on so much anger and frustration, when you watch as she was forever warning the clock turning back, horror helped her process that. Horror has rules, at least. I mean, you might not be able to beat the demon, but you have some sort of a recipe to try, right? If there's some sense, there's some logic to it. Well, this happened because you opened this door, or you read this book, or you chanted these words. And we don't often understand the horrors of real life and a way to process them. So I have come to better understand her as I've gotten older, as I have her losing my mother was the biggest trauma so far. The next one was this current presidential administration. And not just this one, but what it represents about how far we have yet to go to even be where I thought we were, if that makes sense. But art helps us in so many ways, and I'm so proud and happy to be celebrating art, which is what I feel like we're doing with all of you. All of the work that you create, all of the work that you celebrate, and thank you so much for inviting me to join your tribe. Thank you very much.